Thanks, Zulema. And welcome, everybody. It's so great to see all of your faces, or most of your faces, those of you who've put your video on. And welcome back. This is our first, actually, I think, call of the year, which is sort of late in the year for us. We did, I think, 14 or 15 of them last year. And then I think we were just flat out, and like many people, have regrouped. And we've got a fantastic lineup, actually, for the next 6 or 8 months. So get ready for more of these. And thank you again for joining. And thank you in particular to all the subscribers. It's been a terrific a buoying of our spirit over the past year. How many of you have stuck with us and joined up with us? And we really appreciate that. I want to say, as it's become sort of a tradition on these calls, do introduce yourself in the chat feature. Obviously your name and perhaps your organization. I want to try something. I'm not sure it'll work, but put down kind of where you sit in the food chain of impact investing or finance or social change. And it could be, and I'm literally in one word, and for example, on this call, we have some principals. We also have managers, founders, associates, workers, partners, and of course, you can always use agent of impact. So I want to thank a couple agents of impact at the top. Deborah Schwartz, I believe, is on. We'll get to her later, but from MacArthur Foundation, we have a partnership with the Catalytic Capital Consortium, of which MacArthur is a mainstay, around coverage of catalytic capital. And so we thank Deborah and MacArthur and the C3 folks for that. And also Greg Neitchen from Ceniarth. And I've known you a while, Greg, but I probably mispronounced your last name. But Greg has helped put this call together. Ceniarth is what we call an Enterprise Pro subscriber. And you may have seen, a blurb or two about their impact report and whatnot. And they have had some sponsored content, and they have a site license across their whole organization for Impact Alpha subscribers. So if you're interested in Enterprise Pro opportunities, you can talk to Zulema, actually. Thanks, Greg. And then I want to do one more thing, and you can tell us later or offline or what have you. But we've been experimenting kind of in this lull of the early months of the year with Clubhouse, as many of you may have, and we've been having a weekly kind of drop-in session on Clubhouse. Just to talk about the headlines of the week. We do it on Friday after we do the roundups and whatnot. We're thinking that really you all are who we want to be in our Clubhouse, and you may or may not be on Clubhouse. So we're thinking we'll take it maybe off of Clubhouse and back to something like this, but not formalized as like a call, but just really a drop in to talk about the headlines and stuff. So if that seems interesting, let us know. If you like Clubhouse, let us know that too, and we'll let you know in the brief, obviously, what we're up to. But that's our thought, is to bring it back to all of you. Okay, now to our great panel, and I just want to say hi to each of you. Diane Isenberg from Ceniarth, welcome. It's great to see you.
And great to see you again, David. And I'm delighted that you convened this panel was happening.
Well, thank you. I was looking forward to getting another view of your Welsh farmhouse, but we'll get to that in a moment. But thanks for being here. And then Regan Pritzker, welcome.
Hi, thanks, David. Really happy to be here with this incredible group. Good to see some old and new friends.
Terrific. And then a new friend, Sherry Sobrato. Welcome, Sherry. I think you're out here in California.
Yes, I am. And thanks so much for including me on this panel. And I'm just thrilled to see people from around the world gathering. So I didn't have that regret. So super excited about that.
I think Regan, you're out here too, and Ceniarth actually has some folks out here. So there is a California tilt to this, as in many things, but we are global and certainly national, as you say, Sherry. So welcome all. A quick setup, just to be sort of super transparent about what we're up to. We ran through some of the themes in the brief last week, and you probably got tired of them because we hammered it last week. But it was basically the mobilization of family office assets and we ranged across racial justice, racial equity, regenerative agriculture, climate justice, and many other issues. Sorry, I didn't do what I told everybody to do, which was have no interruptions. And then we finally settled on this thing, on this theme, committing family capital to reconstruction and regeneration. And we can sort of unpack all of that. But really what the call is and what the sort of intent was an invitation to wealthy families to step up and model and seed and kind of create this new financial system that we've all been talking about for a while, by shifting their portfolios and putting capital to work, impact first, right? So we can, again, unpack what that is. Here's the sort of warning. I mean, expect our guests to invite, to issue a call to action and invite other families to step up to that across asset classes, across geographies, across all kinds of issue areas and challenges. The key there, again, this catalytic capital, again, we can get into the definitions, but what I can tell you is that from the beat coverage that we do in every sector, in every issue, that's the kind of capital that's in the shortest supply. It often makes the deals work and makes the rest of the impact ecosystem function. And family offices are in a unique position, as we'll hear. There's something like 7,300 family offices around the world. Again, just to be completely sort of transparent about it, that generally means 100 million plus in assets. And that all totals up to something like $6 trillion. So there's definitely the wherewithal to take on big challenges. And importantly, there's also the power. And there's a discussion of power broadly, but I literally mean power, like the decision-making power. And that brings us to our panel where we actually have the decision makers. And that's what's, I think, unique today to talk about committing family capital by the people who are committing it, and not all the other people around finance. So we're really going to try to get into a quite a direct discussion here, and I welcome and I appreciate our guests for stepping up to that. So Diane, let's start with you, if that's okay.
Sure.
Like I said, I was hoping to see your farmhouse in Wales, and I was going to make mention of the fact that you've been living there, I think, for 35 or so years on a sheep farm, a little bit off the circuit, as it were. Tell us a little bit about just your journey as it were, and how you've come to Ceniarth, but just a little bit about yourself.
Well, the name of our farm is Ceniarth, which it took a long time for David and I to get that established last time we spoke. So our office, Ceniarth, was set up in 2013, and it always had the intent of deploying capital into marginalized and vulnerable communities. And at that time, I was intrigued by new business-based approaches and poverty alleviation. And I was interested also in social enterprises and impact investing. And I sort of started on my own. I think that sort of accounts for why ultimately we decided to go for impact investing rather than grants, but it doesn't really account for why we now have gone all in for impact first to differentiate ourselves from sort of double bottom line impact investing. And that was quite a long journey, and I will just try and summarize it pretty quickly. So one of the things that we did early on was to try and find out about the range of solutions to bottlenecks in rural communities, and what was investable. And basically, slowly, we ended up focusing primarily on debt, and we experimented with a pretty wide range of impact investing modalities, from conventional double bottom line investing to pretty high risk PRI making from our foundation. And consistently, we were told by investors and advisors in the market that we could have it all, and that double bottom investing would indeed be the solution to the problem we were trying to tackle. But relatively quickly, it became clear that this was not happening. So in quite a number of our directs, it was clear with companies that were particularly raising at that time, and I'm mostly referring to sub-Saharan Africa, but that were raising large amounts of finance first investment in energy access and financial services. They were moving up market pretty quickly, and they were not focusing on the neediest customers. Additionally, we began to find out more about sectors such as the CDFI market in the US, and with a focus on persistent poverty regions. And there we observed that only through grant subsidy, government policy, and low cost of capital could there be solutions in these communities. So eventually we found that there were a unique set of really high impact funds and enterprises that genuinely had a lower risk profile, but I guess the sacrifice that people would have seen, which used to be, as I've joked, was labeled concessionary capital, and now miraculously is catalytic.
We're breaking through.
Yeah, we're breaking, exactly. The sacrifice was more modest returns. So about 3 years ago, I had this idea about impact first capital preservation. And I wrote a piece in Impact Alpha, and I think that we've been pursuing that ever since. So
let me just stop you and sort
sure.
of pull it apart a little bit, just to make sure everybody's following the steps here. So you started with an impact focus. You are not a finance person by background, I think. And you said to me last time that you knew what you wanted to do. You didn't have an ambiguity about that, but it was just hard to be able to do it.
It was, I mean, when I first started this, I did loads of reading, and I'd actually never heard of impact investing, but it was clear that the solution was going to be opening up these markets with a double bottom return. That's what everything said 8-9 years ago. So I thought, okay, that sounds reasonable. And we started from there. But then the second part of it has to be, of course, that you're set your own return expectations. That's kind of what I said at the top, that unlike and people can argue about the particulars of pension fund managers and others, but folks that have a fiduciary responsibility to somebody else, you could decide what kinds of returns, be they financial, be they impact, you wanted to get from your assets. Absolutely. We have no constraints. We're rich. It's a very different sort of, I feel we're in a different place, and I personally feel we have different responsibilities than institutions that do have fiduciary requirements. And when you later on ask for examples, we often will be subordinate to institutions in order for them to unlock money. So we're really delighted that we are able to have the flexibility to maximize either impact or capital attracted to a sector, a geography, a community where there's really a dearth of it because of our flexibility. And that has led to this impact first capital preservation. People sort of say impact first, but capital preservation is a tried and true strategy for across Australia, regardless of impact. And you've decided that you can have a return profile that recycles the capital at certainly. That's our objective, and our objective is to keep the value of our capital that's being recycled in real terms the same. So obviously you have to take into account inflation and costs. But that's much more modest than what people might call market rate. Absolutely. Whereas, most we do have a foundation, we have family assets, and, most, foundations have different strategy, but certainly, their corpuses are not shrinking often, even with the 5% requirement. And I mean, sometimes they are, but sometimes they aren't. And generally people's personal wealth is growing in real terms. I mean, that is the objective for most people.
Right. And then just to put the capper on the strategy, as I understand it, you're moving funds out of things that other people entering impact investing may be moving funds into.
We are. I was going to say, so I had the legacy portfolio. Then we actually were working with a boutique impact firm, particularly with the foundation. So we are now having to transition out of a lot of finance first impact investments, as part of our transition. So we're transitioning out of things that we actually invested in after Ceniarth was founded.
Right. So the sequence is whatever the legacy was to the impact investments, and now from the impact investments to these impact,
which we call finance first, just for simplification.
Finance first.
So the screen, is finance, and so a lot of people throw out things just because it doesn't meet the financial hurdle.
You mentioned examples, and maybe if you want to just pick one just to give an example so people know what we're really talking about. And
sure. So I will pick something that's in the US. And one of I look at us as having a range of levers. One of those is lowering cost of capital when it's required for impact. So we look for opportunities where we can collaborate with other impact first investors to lower an enterprise cost of capital so that they can reach the target community. The example that I will use is New Hampshire Community Loan Fund. It's a CDFI serving New Hampshire, and it's pioneered helping to cooperatize the ownership of the mobile home community. So this resident-owned model has allowed the tenants to purchase the land that their houses are on, avoiding the insecurity of the increase in ground rents. And there's been a real movement by finance first investors, like recently, relatively the past few years, private equity and hedge funds to purchase these parks. And it's really made, low and moderate income homeowners there's almost 20% of Americans who live in these manufactured homing parks. So this is really critical for them. But as the prices of these parks go up, the residents really are struggling with paying the rents, and it's really causing a lot of people to lose their homes in essence. So in partnership with Libra, so that's, with Regan, so she was part of this Open Society Institute, we were able to support New Hampshire Community Loan Fund with a $13 million loan. So it was $2 million from us. And the blended rate of that was 2%. So we didn't even all do, to be honest, it was a blended rate, and different people could, cope with different returns. And that is, in my view, part of being an impact investor. So I found it really gratifying because you could actually see the effect that was going to directly have on the ground rent of those tenants. Like it made a huge, huge difference. So first, it actually allowed them to buy the land that their homes were on and have that asset and that security. And second of all, it enabled them to actually have a lower ground rent. So to me, that's a really good example of the power of impact investing and the power of impact first.
Terrific. I will say, because now you've said it twice, I should say CDFI stands for Community Development Financial Institution, and they've been super essential through the pandemic in particular. We've been writing quite a lot about them. So that sounds like a terrific example. We love the wonky details. But I did want to take you up just to the call to action, and then we'll move on, because we put out, as you recall, sort of what we called the 10X challenge at the beginning of the sort of pandemic to impact investors to really step up by sort of an order of magnitude. You came back and said, hey, that's too grandiose. What about the 1/10 challenge? And that was just 1/10 of a portfolio towards these kind of impact first investments. And I came back and said, I think 1/10 would be maybe a 10X because it's only about 1% now, if that. So, what would you say to just again, bluntly, other fellow wealthy families about what they can do with their capital in this regard?
Well, I think that, after the sort of, I've been evangelizing, I feel, about impact first capital preservation, the 1/10 challenge. And I think what we've realized at Ceniarth is that it's for many families, it actually, there are many barriers for them integrating this into their conventional investment strategies. So we're actually beginning to pivot to having them thinking about putting it in their philanthropic bucket, which it seems like many families have a lot more flexibility around that. The complexities of family offices, but most of them do have a philanthropic bucket. So I think that basically we're really trying to advocate and raise awareness around particularly DAF holders, that there are now a number of DAF administrators that have a huge amount of spread of offering of impact first. Examples are Impact Assets and CapShift both have, a whole bunch of impact first offerings. And my view is, if people think about maximizing their philanthropic impact this way, because they can use impact investing for their DAF assets while they're waiting to gift them. So it's kind of like, we can go for 2x on that one, possibly. So, I do feel like we're having a little pivot around this, because I don't think I was realistic about what families were able to do, giving them the 1/10 challenge. And I think as far as we're concerned, with foundations who are interested in doing what we're doing, we're really happy, and people with personal wealth, because that is what I'm doing with my personal wealth. We're very happy to have a chat with you. Greg is going to put his email in the chat. And I guess our call to action is, if you have interest in this, if you have capacity and you have the freedom to actually do more impact first, then get in touch. So if you actually have that power, because again, not everybody does have that power with the complexities of some family offices, but if you do, and you're interested in the kind of work we do, we share our pipeline. We're very transparent. We're starting to convene some small groups of investors, and we're starting to think about some larger pooled vehicles that would be accessible to people who might not have, a family office like we have that employs, we employ 12 people. We have 4 finance people. Not everybody has that. So, other ways to dip your toe in
right.
the water and get going with this.
Terrific. We'll dig into that. Thank you, Diane. That's a great segue to Regan. And because Regan, I think when we were chatting, I don't know what you put in the chat because I haven't had a chance to check, but I think you described yourself as a resource mobilizer, which is 2 words, but it can count. And like I said, you were very helpful in sorting out not only all the Pritzkers, of which there are many, but also all the entities of even your just yourself. And we'll get to some of that. But what I really wanted to see is again, sort of why this moment, why mobilize resources, now, like what are you feeling urgently about?
Thanks so much, David. And thanks, Diane. Well, what's not to feel urgent about? They say you save things for a rainy day. It's pouring. I think we all are on this call because we recognize that. And you don't have to, look beyond climate, the pandemic, the racial justice reckoning moment that we're in. When we founded the Libra Foundation 15 years ago, almost, we felt a sense of urgency. Yeah, if not now, when? Thank you. We felt a sense of urgency around this idea of confronting sort of American exceptionalism in the human rights space. So when we founded our family foundation, my parents, my siblings, and we framed it as a human rights foundation because we recognized that in order for these different areas that we cared about, whether it was drug policy reform, women's reproductive rights and health, or the environment, that what all of those had in common was that they were necessary for every person to live a full and robust life and to have a chance to, live the good life. And over the period of that foundation, my understanding of what it was necessary to build that world has been complexified, is one way to say it. As someone who inherited wealth, I think it was maybe easier for me in some ways to hear the critique from our grantees that wealth is not mine, and that our wealth is not ours, that it was extracted from natural resources, from people's labor, has been siphoned off from our public systems through tax saving strategies, and that the call to action wasn't just to invest in better companies, but really to think much bigger picture about what the overall economic, political, social systems we need to build and invest in, both with dollars, but also our natural resources, our personal efforts, our heart and soul. So getting a little out of the investment bubble and really looking at transformative visions for a just and healthy future, that urgency is easy to see from any angle, but hard at sometimes to wrap your head around, well, what does that actually look like? So maybe just to give a quick overview of some of the steps I've been through in my journey. It included forming this family foundation with my family members, recognizing over a period of time that there was a disconnect between our grant making and our investment strategy, spending 5 years trying to do better human rightsy investing, finding that very frustrating because no matter how good your product is, the economic system, sort of the capitalist system has a tendency towards, as I think somebody meant, Diane, you mentioned, shifting towards the better customer over time, or growing or being purchased by companies that aren't as mission aligned, or there's just this, this tendency towards mission drift that was really frustrating. So that evolved into, certainly we were looking holistically at our endowment to do that work, but recognizing that different asset classes can only do so much. And again, just frustrated with the systems. So our advisors, Candide Group, who advise us on our direct investments for Libra, really helped me to see one path forward, which was to look at different models of ownership. Diane mentioned the resident-owned communities, sort of shifting how we think about ownership as a structured way to address the shareholder supremacy problem, and really thinking about stakeholders more robustly. I still think has limits because we don't often think about our non-human and environmental relatives in the ways that we really need to, but are really powerful, and we invest in those opportunities. And then, I had, as time went on, and thanks to my parents who were interested in exploring sort of breaking out of the model of the family legacy that I inherited, which was, this isn't your money, but it's also not community money, it's family money. You can't spend it, you can't give it away, or you can only give a little bit of away. And the highest priority was sort of wealth preservation and passing it on to the next generation. And so again, hearing this call to action from grantees who were saying, that's not your money, not even your personal money, never mind your foundation, that's definitely not your money. But even your personal money came from, my family owned Hyatt hotels. So not paying housekeepers enough, not paying your taxes properly. Really, that was the message I was getting. So I'm like, oh shit, I can't just play on the edges here. I really have to engage in a more reparations framework around this resource mobilization, for myself and then hopefully for others. So long story short, and this was like a 5, 6, 7 year process. So it's hard to say it in 3 minutes.
Story, yes.
But I'll put some of the organizations that trained me and that I learned from, I'll put them in the chat if people are interested in drilling in more. But that, so the combination of my parents being willing to set structures up in ways that gave me more agency earlier in my life than I might have had, and this privilege of being in relationship with movement organizers who were really framing, first of all, this just transition to a regenerative, restorative, caring economy that isn't based on extraction, that is governed in deep democracy, that is not governed through, militarism, which is what we're facing now. That in order to do that, I had to be ready to give more money away also. And so the next project that I started with my husband 2 years ago, the Katali Foundation, the premise of that is really to use the language of finance and investing in ways that are helpful to community, because what we also need is to break away from philanthropy also, that philanthropy is a symptom of wealth accumulation and power concentration that, you know, doesn't serve communities. And so my highest interest in terms of what impact investing can offer is tools for communities to define for themselves what ownership and governance look like, and actually be the vision for the rest of us to lean into what's possible. So as an example of that, what I'll offer is the historic Claiborne Temple, which is a project in Memphis that is a community-based project where groups of organizations have come together, led by Anasa Troutman, who's an incredible leader there, to purchase the historic Claiborne Temple, which of course was the site of multiple speeches from Martin Luther King Jr. during the Civil Rights Movement. And this is it's an anchor for community governance and community power building and community culture building. And I'll put a link to that project in the chat as well. So I think the idea is, yes, we need impact investing, but for me, it really has to come from a point of view of like, whose benefit are you actually operating for? And for me, I've been on this journey to, you know, always keep in mind what is the collective benefit and how do we actually shift power and resources in ways that genuinely break us out of the old models that we've inherited and that have caused the harm in the first place, both to others and also, I would argue, ultimately to ourselves. That, you know, I talk to impact investors who genuinely want to build their green island off the coast of Abu Dhabi where there are no taxes. And I'm just like, that is not the future I want for my kids or grandkids. And I think we could do better. And I think we can unlearn the problems of our extractive economy and learn from, you know, other cultures, other models, and frankly, community organizations and folks at the front lines of these impacts who I think have the most creative and beautiful solutions. And I've said a lot. I'll pause there.
Oh, Regan, no, that's great. I was going to lead you through much of that, and so thank you for sharing that. I just want to make sure people understand the distinction you made, which was the Libra Foundation, the original foundation, I think managed, you know, with, as you said, trying to align its endowment, as many foundations are, with impact and whatnot, and moving through that trajectory. But Katali being quite a radically different thing. For starters, spending down. So not constrained by the sort of need to keep the principal or the endowment topped up so that it can spit off, you know, grants, which is the general foundation formula. And also, as you say, radically kind of devolving or distributing decision-making power. And we've had in Impact Alpha several deals that Katali's been in, and they're all of that kind that you described. They're you seem to be looking for community governed, community controlled, a real kind of shift that's going on again around power, as we've been talking about. So we're super keen to watch Katali's activities, and I do want to just see, you know, you said why not just give it away? So you're you know, I guess that's the question. You say you want to, you know, put philanthropy in its rightful place over time, but why not just give it all away?
Well, so we are. First of all, you know, Diane mentioned the complexity of family offices and family dynamics and family entities, and everyone on this call is familiar with some of the layers of that, whether you're, you know, pitching them for investments or working inside of them or running them. So for me, I do sit at a lot of different tables that each entity has its own set of expectations, culture, values, people at the table. So the Libra Foundation has an investment committee that has made the decision not to grow the endowment, but not to spend it down either. And so we balance investment return with payout annually. So we kind of make an assessment. In 2020, we gave away 10% of the endowment. For 2021 and 2022, we're looking at 6 to 7%. payout, and then we'll reassess if we have investment returns that are beyond that. For the Catalytic Foundation, even though we use investment and lending as a strategy, because we believe that that gets you to a place, first of all, of catalyzing more capital into community control, and as a way to, again, be a part of investing in new models of governance and ownership of assets, whether that's land, funds, or buildings or other assets, hard assets. But the intention is not for that return to accrue back to the Catalytic Foundation itself. We're spending out $445 million over the next, let's say, 10 years. That we don't have a fixed timeline, but 10-ish years, and we're already a few years into that. So that is the, so it's a yes and, because I think what we want to recognize is that economy, translated, from the Greek source, is the management of home, and the management of home is what we want to look different for this future, where we are actually taking care of our natural resources and our human and non-human family members. And so management of home right now, the economy, is a really big problem. It's causing a lot of the harms to those people and places. And so shifting our definition of what economy does for us, for all of us, is a critical part of the thesis. And so that's why we talk about investing, but we're not investing for return to a philanthropic entity. We're investing for return to those communities and those projects so that they can expand and grow and resource themselves from other sources, and support other people who are looking to make redistributive and reparations-based investments. And the language, I'm glad you brought it up. There's one quick thing, is just that I think, as investors, there are tools we have that we want to expand into this philanthropic or social justice space. I think that's good, but we do have to be really willing to reassess and relitigate the definitions and parameters of these things. What is risk? Who gets to have risk? What is return? Where does the return go to? What is impact, right? I think everything has impact. Impact literally means, Morgan Simon in her book starts by reminding us that impact means to apply brute force to something. That's not how we try to use it. So anyway, I could go on, but I think everyone on this call really understands the importance and the pitfalls of language, but also language as a representation of cultures that are pretty strongly embedded in these different fields and need to be questioned.
Indeed. And there's a lot there. But the notion that there's different entities and different parameters around different entities is an important one, which we'll come back to. So let's go to Sherry Sobrato. Out here where I live, everybody knows the Sobrato name because it's on many signs of real estate signs on buildings and whatnot. So everybody knows Sobrato, but I'm delighted to meet you. And maybe you could just tell us a little bit about your journey and your family and where you've come to.
Sure, great. Yes, we are real estate developers. The Sobrato organization is based in Silicon Valley, and it has three components, really. It has the real estate side, but because of wonderful fortune that my father's company was able to make, we also have a capital side and have had a foundation for almost 25 years now. And what's exciting is that we're all basically here. So there's 4 generations of Sobratos. The youngest, the 4th generation, is not quite old enough. Those are the little kids, my brother's grandchildren. But I'm Gen 2. I should say that I'm the daughter of John Sobrato, the real estate entrepreneur. And it's an exciting time for us because what we're really doing right now is we're re-envisioning kind of what this Sobrato 2.0 is going to look like when we're running the company, when our kids are running the company. And I think a lot of the interest and impact work, which I'll talk about how that journey, got to be, is really how as a company are we going to engage the next generation, both participating on the company side, the real estate and capital sides, as well as on the philanthropy side. And it really came from my brother's kids, who are the oldest. They're in their early 30s. That we've decided to start thinking about this because, my sister's kids are going to be graduating college. Also, my kids are younger, but we have to think about how it is that we're going to engage the next generation. And we really felt by by having an organization that's not like making money, like Regan was saying, making money on one side and then giving it away on the other, but it was integrated. Like, how can we integrate just more mission-driven work into both the capital and the real estate side, and not just the foundation side. So that's where we are today. And our journey in impact investing specifically is a long one. I have to say, it sort of started with me. When I was just getting out of college, my first job was working for a broker who was screening portfolios regarding social, SRI criteria of her clients. So that predated when our foundation existed. So as soon as the foundation started, I said to my dad, I have this great idea. What about if we take the corpus of the foundation, which was very, very minimal back then. It was more of a pass-through foundation, but I have a broker now who is screening, my little portfolio regarding social criteria. And he said, no, we'll never make any money doing that. I'll make the money, and you girls, meaning my sister and I, you guys figure out how to give it out on the foundation, but let's not mix the two. And, I kept at it. I've been on board member since inception, so almost 25 years, and I've been at it all these years. And finally, after more than 15 years, my brother makes an announcement that we're going to now invest the corpus of the foundation, which has grown significantly according to social criteria. So I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. I've only been trying for 20 years, but what that meant was just to invest in according to ESG criteria in an index fund. And I kind of hit my head over the head, and I said, after 20 years, this is where we are. But it was a start. So I said, oh my God, this is fantastic. And meanwhile, while they were warming up to the idea, the greater family, my husband and I have always had a very active role in the impact space. And it started with just small single company investments with money out of our bank account before philanthropic capital was able to be deployed for impact investing. And then when it moved that we could use our DAF money, we took really just companies that are sectors, I guess I should say, that we were interested, like education and solar, and did single company and healthcare, single company investments. And that was just kind of to feel better about what I was doing with my personal investment capital and philanthropic capital. But anyway, that's accelerated because when my husband retired a couple of years ago, we said, we can do certainly so much more than we're doing now. So my personal space, and we're doing this to be an example to the family, I think, of how it can work, and certainly to my nephews who are in their 30s, and hopefully my sister's kids who are growing up, to say, you as an individual family member, that's kind of really how our impact investors has started for our family. And I'll tell you where we've gotten to, but by saying, each family member, we do have our own resources. And even if it's small relative to, what the family has, you can have a portfolio and have impact with just your own capital and be a good example to the family. So we've been having a ton of fun with it, with areas that we're passionate about. For example, I'm very passionate about healthcare. And one of the specific opportunities that I've had is I was really concerned about COVID and what it was going to do to our world. And so I decided to develop a mandate with a group called Benefunder to find investments where I could make a difference by putting in philanthropic capital and philanthropic investment capital in both the research side. So it was partly grants and partly impact investments, mostly impact investments for companies that were coming up with solutions, medical solutions to the COVID crisis. So that's one example of what I've done in healthcare. Another really exciting project that we've done, which is actually coming on 3 projects, is working with another group that it's like having my own little mini X Prize and things that I'm interested in. We launched these challenges where companies are being launched around unused IP that's just sitting in academia, or and other companies and settings that are in discoveries that are not being used, and launching companies around that in my areas of interest, like brain tumors or children's health and rare diseases. And we've had a number of children's health challenges, a brain tumor challenge, and that's another way that I'm actively participating. What's fun is at this stage that we're in now, because it is small, we get involved with these companies. We've helped them find other investors. We get to know the entrepreneurs. And to me, I'm really enjoying that in that sort of small space. But anyway, I just, kind of wrapped up, where is it with the family now is, as we have been that example to the family in a small way. My brother's now doing his own kind of vertical in the space of, non-meat alternatives, because that's his and his wife's passion. We have gotten our family interested in doing something that we're passionate about, which is kind of ocean health. We had some impact investments and grants in that area. And we launched a very large, because the money is much greater if you include collectively the rest of the family and what we're doing. And we've launched an oceans portfolio. And because we really are a grant maker first, that's, kind of our bread and butter. And that's what we understand. That portfolio is 80% grants, but it's 20% impact investments. It's opening the idea to the family that we can go beyond just ESG criteria and actually actively support some of these individual companies. So, if I had to say, what's the call to action here? Never say never. I mean, I had, it's been a long journey with our family, but now, for example, my dad, that's all he does is impact investing. He's like, wow, recycle capital. I'm like, yes, Dad, I've been talking to you about this for like 20 years, but suddenly the light bulb went off. And now he's like, don't talk to me. I brought a couple of grants to his attention that I wanted to work collaboratively with them. He's like, don't talk to me about grants. I only do impact investments now. So, it can happen.
Well,
so
there you go.
There, in case there's some questions.
But there you go. I mean, it does bear what Greg was saying, which is that it's going to be easier pathway from the philanthropic side sometime, because the return expectations are a grant, which may be the complete loss of the capital loss, depending how you think about it. But you don't have to compete against so-called market rate returns, I think is what we're kind of getting at here. Jessica Brooks brought up a point which I was going to bring up too, which is we did not select this panel to be all women, but it just is, and it's sort of interesting. And I wonder whether any of you, before we turn it over to the audience, have thoughts on the sort of gendered aspect of the journeys and what the obstacles and or opportunities are. And then folks should tee up. I think Dennis is going to start to try to collect some questions, I guess, from the chat. So Dennis, start thinking about themes or grouping them, because I think there might be many. And Regan, I think you had some thoughts.
Well, first, I think it's important to represent the momentum we're seeing in the next generation, to be sure we're not falling into a false gender binary. So with that stated, I do think, we live in a world that does have pretty strong gender frames. And, unfortunately, those things gendered masculine, like the military, like extractive industry, like domination, like war. I think I said that twice. Maybe that's important. Always get resource. There's plenty of resource, and they're defended militarily. Those things gendered female: teaching, nursing, caregiving, cleaning, providing food. Those are gendered female. So in that sense, I do think, again, when I picture a couple generations down the line, what does the economy look like? It's gendered much more feminine, which is not to be at the exclusion of people who might biologically identify as male. It's really to say, we are at a crisis in our natural systems that has been wrought from a overly male patriarchal system. So, not to say scary words that freak people out, but I think, our extractive racial capitalist society has led us here. And if we want to repair that, we need, to me, something radically different. And I think that's why you see more women leaning into this repair work. And I think men who are feminists lean into this work, and they may not identify as such, but I think they are. So welcome to being feminists. Those of you who are doing kind of reparative impact investing, thank you. So that's my thought. And I'm thrilled to be in a sisterhood with people like Diane, Sherry, and David to do this work.
Could I just add one thing?
Yeah, sure.
I just feel like from our perspective, and I think what I really like about this panel, I think, is that it has a really broad spectrum of views of how to tackle all really important problems. And there's a whole, we have different strategies, we're using different tools, but I personally think it's all really, really important. You know, as we kind of slowly transition towards utopia, because in the meantime, there's a lot of shit to be dealt with. Excuse my language. And I feel like that's where we sit, you know, our focus on poverty. We each have our own interest areas, but I do feel like, you know, I want to really reinforce how important it is for women as leaders and women as examples and exemplars. So we have, for example, an all-female finance team, you know, and we have a really gender lens is really critical to the work we do. We're actually working with Value for Women with all our portfolio companies. So I feel like there's a lot of practical, we're very pragmatic and practical, down to earth. How do we solve these problems? How do we, in the meantime, you know, before there's, I mean, we all are hoping for this, a transition, but I also feel like I sit with, in the meantime, we're just gonna try and make people's lives better on a day-to-day basis. Because if you don't know where your next meal is from tomorrow, you can't quite have the capacity to deal with some of this other stuff. So I would like just to reinforce, you know, the importance of kind of having all these tools and filling all these gaps, and with families going where your family can go as well. I think everybody is in a very different situation. And the fact that people are really thinking about these things and starting to move on these things is what's most critical. And hopefully if there are wealth holders out there, you can look to the three of us and think, you know, that speaks to me. I might be able to start moving this direction, and get in touch with any of us.
All these tools that suppose I think is right, Diane, and that's a good time to just bring up briefly Deborah Schwartz from MacArthur. Deborah, are you on? And have you hung in? You may have had to jump, and I can't see all the screens here. Who's been a mainstay of this whole catalytic capital rebranding, as I think you pointed out, Diane. Okay, I don't see Deborah. I also wanted to see Michael Etzel from Bridgespan, and this, in a sense, this webinar in a sense follows the webinar that Michael did about a week or so ago, also in a report that kind of called out this family office opportunity. Michael, is there anything that sort of big theme that emerges here that you want to add a little Bridgespan spin to?
No, not much to add to a panel like this. You know, when we're hearing from folks that have been at it for a long time, and as you know, as Regan, you put it so well, if not now, when? Right. This is our rainy day. This is the moment for families to play a different role. The reason why, you know, we tried to make a small contribution to this conversation and in doing some research in a report recently is because we wish there were more faces on this screen, on this webinar, more principals, more families making these same decisions, and just asking the question for those who are maybe earlier in their journey, who are taking those first steps, what can that look like? If you don't have a team, if you don't have a full staff, if you don't have a fully up and running foundation, can you get into this? And you know, the one thing that I think we've picked up from that is the answer is yes, right? There are great fund managers and products out there. You can move money into black-led CDFIs in the US. You can move money into more proximate leaders in other emerging parts of the market, right? You know, lots of great sub-Saharan Africa ag finance opportunities I know Ceniarth has participated in. So, you know, it's don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good moment, and lots of opportunities. Come on in, the water's fine. And so that's a little bit of what we were trying to bring to this, is to point a bridge towards leaders like the ones you're hearing from today. What are those first baby steps for those that might just be coming into the conversation?
Great. And there's also other folks, other ways in, and there's networks and whatnot, and some of them are here, and maybe they've introduced themselves in the chat, like CREO, which is climate and environmental opportunities, a network of families. Tonic, as many of you know, a network of families doing impact investing. Prime Coalition, which we may have somebody from Prime on, which is catalyzed a bunch of family offices into early stage climate investing. So as you say, Michael, there are lots of ways in. Let's do this. It's coming on the hour. You obviously, anybody can leave whenever they want, but we're going to keep the room open for about another 20 minutes. So we don't need to necessarily end right at the top of the hour. Like I say, if you have another call or another meeting or what have you, and you have to jump off, don't feel shy or abashed about that. But let's see who wants to step up. Or Dennis, are there questions that have emerged?
There not a whole lot, but there was a specific question around what folks on the panel have been doing, or have they engaged with First Nations or Native communities with catalytic capital strategies. There was a question about the Catalytic Foundation's experience aligning its endowments to its mission, which I think Regan, you spoke a bit to. I'll throw out a question, which is, and since Deborah Schwartz wasn't able to come on, there has been like this idea of catalytic capital filling gaps. There's actually a number of success stories. Like if you look at affordable housing or community development finance in the US, and early catalytic investors getting those markets to the point where commercial capital can come in. Last year, we saw African commercial solar, the mRNA platform had early philanthropic or at least PRI support, climate tech solutions. So I feel like there's like proof points now for this. And I wonder for the panelists, like, have those been sort of inspirations that this type of work can move the dial on in specific markets? And I also be curious, like, what are the next gaps that you're aiming to fill? Whether it's sort of broad market or a specific sector.
You can take any or all of those, the panel, and other folks can chime into the chat with questions. The question about indigenous people, I know there's been a lot of activity and a lot of interest in that.
Can talk about indigenous funding for a moment. I had the privilege of spending some time on the Lakota Sioux Reservation a couple years ago through a program that Justice Funders coordinated called Maestra, which is a year-long fellowship training that was kind of getting at this issue of like full resource mobilization for impact, right? Your grants, this was specifically for philanthropic endowments, but I think it's relevant for family offices or for personal wealth. The idea of like your philanthropy, your investing, and your personal work, engaging all of those modalities. Getting to see on the ground what Nick Tilson and the team at NDN Capital and NDN Collective were working on was really powerful. And I think, again, in this model of like who's at the table and who gets to decide and who's setting the vision for the future, it's really exciting to see leaders like Nick and the team at NDN stepping into that. Akiptan, which is a agroecology fund that's Native women led. I can put a link in the chat, is a fund that we have invested in. And it's just exciting to see this emerging leadership. And for me, I think one of the things that we can all do, I'm seeing a lot of faces that represent lots of different cultures and nationalities and ethnicities on this call, which is really beautiful to see. But for me, as a white person of Jewish heritage, who has wealth privilege, to really also like, as I'm thinking about like all these intellectual decisions we're going to make, one of the things I get from being in community with Native leaders is like a reminder to get out of your head and into like a different cultural mode. And so I think in addition to investing and thinking what can we do for them, I think it's super important, especially if you're working cross-culturally, to recognize that we have really essential things to learn from those communities. And So that's a pitch for just like, yeah, building relationships across your cultural comfort zones and really leaning into funding Black, Indigenous, and POC-led firms. And to Diane's point about like, anytime you're moving resources, you're supporting livelihoods, and like whose livelihoods are being supported, whose vision is being supported, and what do we have to learn from those experiences.
I want to open it up. I know we're going to sort of, I'm going to sort of, speaking of relinquishing power, let go of moderating and let folks just kind of hang out. But I do want to give the panelists a sort of chance for a last thoughts. And I also wanted to see whether there's anybody else of my ringers who I can't quite see on the gallery here because there's so many screens. But just speak up if you know who you are. So speak up if you want to make a quick comment. Okay, so maybe folks have taken off. So Diane and Sherry and Regan, just quickly, thoughts about what others can do and where you think we can go.
So it's Greg. I might jump in for Diane.
Okay, great.
She had to leave the call. I took her chair quite literally in the room. So I think I can't say
Greg,
it.
Sorry, Greg works. Greg is the what do you call yourself? Executive director
of Ceniarth. Yeah.
Of Ceniarth, yes.
So I can't say it as powerfully as Diane, but I think she said get in touch, and I think that is really our call to action. I think we always say at Ceniarth we have a strategic plan. It's called doing things, and I think that practicality is really what we're all about. So. We're happy to talk to people about pipeline and share deals, share notes. Drop me a line if you're an asset owner that wants to do this stuff. It's not rocket science. We can get things done.
And I don't know whether Victoria. I didn't tell you I would cold call you, but you're working with Victoria's. Had we known for years with Village Capital, and now working with Sobrato and Sherry. I don't know if you want to say something very briefly. Just hello.
Yeah, thanks, David, and thanks everybody. I put in the chat, same call as Greg. We'd love to collaborate. As Sherry so brilliantly described, the family has been long time active in this space on a number of fronts, and I'm really excited about all the potential that exists in this next chapter. Great.
Okay, so I promised Regan and Sherry also final thoughts.
I'll just jump in there, and I'll just really echo, that the idea to just get started. I mean, we started with just a few tiny investments out of my bank account, and now we have Victoria joining us, joined us, I should say, because she's there, which is so exciting. I never thought I would live to see the day, and I think that it's just such an opportunity to take philanthropic capital and be able to make some risks that you might, like you were saying, if you're coming from the grants lens, which we are, to be able to take some risks that we might not have otherwise done, in the investment space. And just the importance of philanthropic capital to start projects that, can morph into these amazingly great companies. So I just feel like it's such a privilege to be able, since it was just kind of us doing stuff on our own at first, to be able to take small resources, no amount of resources is too small, to be able to invest it according to your ideals and make a difference. So that's all.
Great. And then Regan, you'll get kind of the last official word. But as I say, don't go anywhere. We'll just open the room up in a few minutes.
Well, I just really appreciate this audience and the active chat. I wish I'd brought a wing person to help me navigate all the great comments and questions in there. Really appreciate that engagement and that everyone is here with like a full heart, trying to lean into breaking out of habits. I think my last call to action would just be to continue your learning journey. Suzanne posted in the chat, like follow Native Women Lead, follow follow these resources, get in a training at your comfort zone, whatever. And, Diane said this also, like, everyone's going to have a slightly different role to play in this, but don't make sure that no matter where you sit in this ecosystem, that you're not giving yourself a hall pass to your continued learning. Resmaa Menakem, who's a writer I follow, who wrote a beautiful book called My Grandmother's Hands, which some of you may have read. His call to white people is to enter into a 7 to 10 year journey on racial awareness. Robin DiAngelo talks about building racial stamina. That's just one frame for it. I mean, I think it's more than just race class consciousness, although I think that's critical. But be in a learning journey and find places where you can learn from folks who come from a very different ecosystem than yours. Don't just stay inside the impact investing or investing ecosystem. Bust out. Go to a movement-led training, go to Black Lives Matter trainings, reparations summer. There's just so much out there that we don't see outside of our bubble. And I think that's a really important thing that I'm trying to do and that I really invite all of you to do as well.
Great. And then the sort of same invitation goes from Impact Alpha side too. And, if reach out to us with your stories, with your deals, with your strategies, with your guest posts, and we're going to be tracking the mobilization of this family capital, and in particular this catalytic capital, for the foreseeable future. So the trajectory is up. There's a lot of what did Diane's great line? There's a lot of shit to be done on the road to utopia. So so I think what I'm going to do is I think it works better when I turn actually my video off, but I'm not going anywhere. Zulema and Dennis, you want to sort of help to the extent there's anybody needs facilitating, but we'll see you on our next Agents of Impact call. We'll see you in the pages of Impact Alpha. Zulema, I'm gonna go mute.
I'm just going to jump in here real quick. This is Sherry. I just need to run. So if anybody has a quick question for me, if we could do that. Otherwise, I'll put my my personal email address in the chat. If anyone wants to write me, they can do that.
Thank you, Sherry. We'll be rounding up all the resources that you all share here with us in the chat. So we'll probably have the call recording next week. So do check back for that, and Sherry will be sure to include, not your email, but we'll let people know how to reach you.
I'm sure I just had a quick question. I know you mentioned that you've been trying to talk to your dad about changing to go to a switch to more impact investing, and you mentioned that there was this light bulb moment for him. I was wondering, do you have any thoughts into how to best go about trying to communicate that value now going forward? Like how to instead of waiting for someone's own personal light bulb moment, but how to kind of encourage that conversation to happen a little bit faster?
Well, since we were talking about gender, I don't know if this is going to be particularly helpful, but I think it's when my brother and brother-in-law started to show up mostly my brother started to show up at this impact conferences and things that I was going to. And they said, oh, so you're Sherry's brother, so it was kind of flipped. And I think that it was partly, that it really took somebody that had been, that my father respected, that had been involved on the real estate side of the business for some years to take it seriously. So I don't know if that's particularly helpful, but that's what happened in our family. And I just think being an example is probably the best thing. I mean, even if it's in a small way. I think the conversations are hard, but I think that I really think ultimately, at least it is in our family, that it was really about that engagement piece, and if someone who has a vision of having a foundation, not only to make impact in the world, but also as a vehicle to keep the family together, to keep them working together, to keep them excited about the changes that they can make in the world. I think that's really it. I mean, I think that my dad, he kind of had to get later in years. He's 83 now. And number one, he wants to see the work of his money in his lifetime. And I think that some impact deals can be short. They don't have to be 10 years. They can be 2 years or 3-year grants or something. That was an important part. He wanted to see us all working together, and he wanted to see, the older adult Gen 3 kids being involved. And this is what it was going to take. And it was just little step by step. And I think he realized that when we switched our corpus of foundation to an ESG criteria, we didn't lose a lot of capital. So I think it was little by little. So good luck. Good thing you're young.
I'm seeing so much power in intergenerational conversations. I think, just showing up again, part of that learning journey is like talking about what you're learning, and it doesn't have to, one of the things I learned at a training was like, if you came to this training thinking, I wish my dad was here, I wish this other person was here, like you have to put that out of your head because we all have work we need to do. Stay in your own journey. And then I think that gives you a really powerful place to talk about that with others without feeling like you have to teach other people or tell people what to feel. It's enough to just share what you're experiencing. And if you're finding joy in that journey, that joy is going to be a lot more contagious than blame, shame, guilt, which is what, a lot of us who, especially if we've inherited wealth, like have to process to even get to like a power position where we can engage meaningfully. So find your bliss and share that.
I'll just throw in too, I think being respectful of the generation above, because, it's like in our case, we didn't make the money, he did. And I think respecting him as a business person, respecting him as a philanthropist, because even in the boardroom on the philanthropy side, he might want to put his name like was said in the beginning of the conversation on a building, maybe that's not what the next generation or even the next generation done. But when he saw people light up, when we started working collectively on our individual philanthropy, because we were given individual resources to give away as well, for many years, for really a good 15 or 20 years, it was always siloed. Well, Sherry, she's the children's health person. My sister's foster youth or whatever. And then when he saw us coming together around both on the impact side or some new areas of philanthropy that we were looking at together, then we were able in our family to actually structure a vehicle around that in terms of family engagement and being able to work together. And I think that that's really what my dad wanted to see. His whole reason for putting this together was so that we could collectively have greater impact and so that we could work together as a family. So I think when he saw the bigger picture, that's one light bulb went off for him.
Thank you.
Anybody else have a quick question for me? Because I'm sorry, was due on another call. I need to sign off. Yes, no. Okay.
Sherry, I just have one quick question. I know, and maybe to all of the panelists, I know a lot of the new trends are coming from emerging managing directors that are maybe a little younger, definitely more diverse. How would you suspect, people that don't have huge networks like most of the people on the call, but have great ideas? How are your offices finding that, and how are you finding or accepting the outreach to your offices?
Well, for me personally, I think finding people that I can trust in a community. I started with TPW, the Philanthropy Workshop, and learning through them, SV2, which is another good collaboration. And I think, we all can't expect to be the experts on everything, and being able to, and also just individuals I met through those networks have been really good mentors to me, because I started playing a pretty advanced role in my family in my 20s, and I really didn't know anything. And I think finding people that were a little further down the path than me that could help bring me up. And now I'm in a privileged position now, being that older person, that I can turn around and help those younger generations, those people who are just building and starting things for their family. I can help them out.
Thanks, Sherry. I think that I was just going to answer that question. Also, it's really hard. Like I feel I feel bad. Like we don't have great systems for like absolutely everybody to channel into our philanthropy or our investing. It's something we struggle with. We have at Catalytic Foundation, we're experimenting with having like an intake form that'll have the questions that we would ask to filter out things that aren't aligned with our work so that people don't, so that it can be open, but people aren't kind of like spending time on wooing us if it's not going to be a fit. Because unfortunately it isn't always a fit. Family offices are even more opaque. It's part of the critique of, concentrated private capital, right? Is that it ends up being like the old boys network. So I don't have any brilliant advice. I think coming to events like this where people are willing to share, lots of people were texting me in the chat, hopefully there'll be some follow-up from that. We're still in like a competitive marketplace instead of a collaborative marketplace. And so that like racing for the person's attention is part of the burden of the entrepreneur. And I wish I had a better answer than that, but I just want to give you empathy and sympathy that it's something we do think about and worry about and feel like, I try to have a great team around me who are themselves a little more accessible and available maybe than like I might be individually. And I do try to make myself somewhat findable. I'm on LinkedIn, you can text me, I may or may not get back to you, like that's just the nature of it. But I appreciate the disconnect between like the, people who are like, especially first fund managers of color, or entrepreneurs, women who don't have those networks, don't have friends and family, Monday, like that is a critical problem. And so for us, we look at it as like, well, we don't have rules about not investing in first time funds. We don't have rules about, and we're counting our numbers on what is the diversity of our portfolio. So we try to do what we can, but it's a problem.
I'd like to pick up on that, if I may, Regan. It's so refreshing hearing Sherry and Regan and Greg talking about these issues. If you think about how wealth is created with people, with planet, we use natural resources, we use people resources. Actually, the scarcest resource that's available right now is capital. There are so many innovations and good ideas. There are so many people willing to work and create new models of wealth creation. And when you think about the visions that people have on wealth distribution, there are lots of models, good models out there as well. But the capital markets are in fact very conventional, very tight, very uncreative. And so when entrepreneurs like myself go back into the capital markets with what obviously I think is a great idea, the conversation immediately gets constrained to, all right, what are my returns? What are the risks? Are you working in the desert with ocean tech? Well, that's just a bit risky. Where is that? Morocco? That's a bit crazy. You're trying to do what with the community? And it becomes this, you get pushed back into quite a conventional box of conversation for the capital resource. So what I would like to encourage you to do is to go out as much to that market, as much to the capital providers as you come into these kinds of fora, and educate them about alternative models, because they don't have a way of measuring risk other than conventional models. They don't adjust their rates of return for repayments back to planet or repayments back to community. They don't have a wealth sharing model that is as sophisticated as yours. And so I'd really encouraging, I think one of your biggest impacts, in fact, is to go to people with capital. And I know that's what, in part, this forum is for. But it's so refreshing to hear your messages, and would deeply encourage you to go out to other providers of capital and spread it.
We lost our moderator for a second. This is the informal moment.
Should I phrase that as a question to a panelist? I'm sorry.
Well, I know it's fine. This was described to us as the panelists as just kind of the hangout at we're in the hallway now, basically at the conference. So it can be more informal. There's so many resources. I'm really appreciative to Zulema for offering to, curate all of the links and references in the chat, because they're really rich. And probably will be the instigation for another panel. It seems like, there's enough there to really build on.
There will definitely be more conversations on this. And sorry, Regan, just to add to this, if you are an Impact Alpha subscriber, we do have a Slack members only channel. So the conversation can continue there as well. So always feel free to jump on there and continue the conversation and of course make connections. So just to use that.
And Keith, if there was a call to action there to keep talking about these issues to other wealth holders, because I think that's true. Like I, for example, talked about kind of trying to move from a place of like shame and guilt to like joy and power and, partnership. And part of that transition for me has been to get comfortable with the playing a role that I have to play, even if it isn't a role that I chose for myself, which is to leverage, my access to private spaces that, people with wealth privilege can gather in, that entrepreneurs and, fund managers don't always have access to, and to try to talk about these topics. So, if that's like iconic, I'm on a webinar, if I get invited, I will go, even if it's not my people. I'm like, these are my people, but I will talk to you and I love you. Like, I care about you. I want you to, I want you to do good things with your resources and, it's threading the needle, right? Getting to the spaces where people are there for, with good intention, and then just maybe need partnership or need, ideas and creativity around that circle. So I do that. David made a joke about me referring to myself as a resource mobilizer. That's for me what that looks like, is to, people say Pritzker and they want to put me on a panel. I'm like, all right, like I'm not that Pritzker that like is the business genius, but I'll tell you a thing or two that I have to say if you're interested.
And I guess the only thing I'd add from our perspective at Ceniarth is that we've been advocating for this stuff till we're sort of blue in the face, as Diane was sort of describing earlier. And I think what we've come to find is that it's really about the right conversation with the right person, and also just respecting people's real constraints. I think that I think, like Diane said earlier, we'd all obviously love to see some of those capital providers make radical change, but some of them just face realistic fiduciary constraints that, we can want anything. It just, they're not going to move. So I just think that a lot of time, we've wasted a lot of time in the last 8 years spinning our wheels, talking to people who are never gonna change because of what constraints they face. And we're at this point, we're trying to go where the water's easier and it's flowing downhill. And I think, as Diane said earlier, it's talking to other people who have a true philanthropic mindset to this, not who are, trying to change how the capital. I mean, somebody else on this call can be go change the capital system. By all means, go do it. But we're going to try to take hopefully a path of lesser resistance, and that's where we'll be hanging out.
I think that's great.
Sorry if I may just add, I speak in part from an experience growing up as a white South African during apartheid and throwing myself into that particular struggle. A story for another time, but what I learned in that is that you got to work at both levels. Is that, you got to create the lead case studies of change. You've got to mobilize your local communities around the local issues. You've got to create your activists at a local level. But unless you change the system at a national level, in this case at an international level, we're not going to get far enough. And I think the two levels can interact very powerfully, one through the type of investments you do and the type of case studies you create, which demonstrate the change you want to make. But at the other, never stopping, pushing at the top level for the sort of system change that will actually break the back of the big issues that we got to deal with, which are poverty and climate change, really. I mean, it can bring it down to a nutshell, and inequality. And I think working at both those levels very vociferously, I get your frustration. I get your impatience.
I think, Keith.
But
I think that's right. And it's coordination so that we know, like, I know Greg's holding down this piece of the work, then like Katali can hold it over here and fund some of that movement building that maybe, Ceniarth wasn't designed to move money that way. That's cool. You guys do your thing. We can do our thing. We just have to
Yeah.
learn how to partner and be in relationship in different ways. And that's the other thing that, old models, competition over cooperation. No, that's not how we're going to get there. So that's another thing
Yeah.
we need to really break out of. And this idea of constraints, like I'm a big fan of no can always lead to yes. So this has happened in my family so many times where it's like, we can't do that. And then suddenly magically something shifts and I don't even know exactly how to account for it, but no can turn to yes. And that's what we have to lean into. I think John McIntosh had a hand.
Yeah, I had a quick question for you or Dave or Greg. Like 7 years ago, I tried to raise a fund with a minus 20% rate of return target, impact first, and that was a short conversation. So we accommodated, rose the target to 0, and that fund's grown a lot. So my sense, at least in Little New York City, is that there were only 4 foundations who would take that deal, and now there's 12, and that feels good. But on the other hand, I worry, and you have a perfect position to reflect on this, whether the mega funds are making it easy for family offices to say they're doing impact stuff when they're really not. Like if you look at the opportunity, if you look at some of the stuff, and I was a partner at one of these firms, so I'm not casting aspersion, but the KKRs and Apollos and TPGs of the world, to us, no matter how big those funds are, they aren't going to change the world in the way we need it to be changed. But I worry that in family offices, people can say to themselves, yeah, like we're doing the impact thing. We put money in the KKR fund. Is that a real worry? Do you see that?
I think that's a worry. I think that it can be a step in the right direction. If you need an easy way to put your toe in the water of impact investing, I'm okay if you start with your public equity and you go to a screened fund. Then I would ask, does this business, where the profits are going from this business actually reflect my values? And who do I want to be enriched by my investment, both the people working on my money and the people that are getting investments from my money? So I think it just has to be, if you get stuck there, then no, we're doomed. But if it's a learning space, then I don't think it's the worst thing for a family office that's never done anything to maybe get talked into an ESG fund that's palatable to the older generation, whatever, right? So I said at a conference once, it's only a step in the right direction if you keep walking. So I agree. I think it's a huge risk that's a pitfall that we stop and think about impact investing as. I actually don't think impact investing should be, I challenge again, this idea of who benefits, I think is a really critical piece. And I like the idea of funds with less than 100% return, but I would want to look at who is managing that fund, who's getting paid salaries to manage that money, and who's setting the vision for where those resources are going, and are they deeply aligned with this cultural shift that I'm talking about.
I'd just chime in briefly that I think the risk is less. We've talked about this at various points in the conversation. There's got to be paths for people, right? So I don't think it does us any good to be purists at the expense of getting people in to do whatever their starting point is with those big funds. I think the bigger risk for us as a whole field is that there's a lot of attention and momentum put on those big funds. Then there's a resulting backlash about whether they've just been impact washing or greenwashing, and it sort of dilutes everybody's reputation of impact. So the people that were sort of on the sidelines, skeptical, and were waiting and watching the big funds paint everybody with the same broad brush of oh, well, this thing is never going to work, or these people are using impact as a PR and marketing signal that then ends up cannibalizing resources from the other people who've been doing great work for decades. So it doesn't. And that's a collective responsibility that's hard to manage, right? Because unless you're a decision maker at one of those funds that's really influencing the direction of things, what are you going to do about that? I think the things that give me hope in that to some extent are if you take Apollo, which has had a very mixed track record in terms of the negative externalities that they've had as an investment firm. Now, Lisa Green-Hall is there, stewarding a lot of their impact conversation. She's somebody that gives me a lot more comfort that maybe she will be able to turn the battleship. So I think, rather than malign people who may not have the exact same impact approach as us, we gotta meet people where they are.
I'd just like to add some of the earlier commentary that with so much of the talk about capital, especially financial capital, that it's so easy to overlook that the vast majority of capital sources, especially those in global south, it's easy to overlook, is from the global north here, is non-financial. And of course, despite the pitfalls, despite the flaws with using GDP and wealth as any proxy here, but if you consider we have over 400 trillion worth of financial wealth in the world and GDP is just over 80 trillion, then just going by returns, at least 80% of global GDP is actually attributable to non-financial capital. So what are we missing there? We're only getting 20%. So where's the other 80% there? So that's definitely not something to overlook. And furthermore, it's not just there's abundance of financial capital, but also how scalable are the projects? So how scalable is it that you're proposing? Because if you can get to some level where it would actually attract, it has of course impact, ESG criteria, all that, and be able to attract some of the much larger funds, then there's a good chance people will just throw money at you. Just look at how much VCs, how much Musk, Gates, all of them, how much they're throwing at clean tech and such. Look at those numbers and ask yourself, well, how do you actually get those to scale? Or how do you actually get to scale there? It's, again, not an issue of lack of capital per se, but rather, do we have enough opportunities that are bankable and scalable?
That's a great question. I don't have an answer, and I also have to go. So
shall we leave it on a question like Regan says for the next call?
It was a meaty one.
Thank you so much. You all who are still here are the hardy survivors. So thank you all for coming, and thank you Regan and all the speakers and all of you. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody.